Hey y'all, I'm the Razor Storyteller. Been trimming faces and swapping life stories in my barber chair for over a decade. My clients have bared their souls right beneath my shears, and today I'm passing along one of those unforgettable tales. With their permission, and with names changed to protect privacy, here's the story of Cole Faulkner, his daughter Zoe, and the mysterious boy who walked through an ICU door and turned despair into hope. Let's dive in. Do you hear that? It's more than the wind of a blizzard. It's the sound of a city being brought to its knees. January, Chicago. History will remember it as the worst snowstorm of the century, a white wall swallowing all hope, burying every sound beneath a blanket of bitter ice. But in nature's fury, the real tragedy wasn't happening outside. It was unfolding silently on the 57th floor of the tallest hospital building in the city. This is Cole Faulkner, a genius architect, a man who spent his life conquering skylines with steel and glass. The buildings he designed stood firm against any storm. But now the greatest creation of his life, his 10-year-old daughter Zoe, was collapsing from within. Zoe wasn't in a coma. The truth was far more cruel. She had locked-in syndrome. Imagine that for a second. Your mind is wide awake. You hear your father crying. You feel your mother's hand, but you can't move, can't speak, can't even blink to signal you're there. You are a prisoner in your own body, a flesh and bone jail with no escape. Every top doctor said the same two words: no hope. And when hope died, technology arrived. Gideon Sterling, billionaire, inventor, CEO of Neuralink. He brought his billion-dollar machine, a brain-computer interface that was supposed to reboot the soul. The press called him a savior. But to Cole, that machine was just a cold attempt to turn his daughter into a PR project. And then it failed. Completely. The steady beep of the monitor became an indictment of the powerlessness of both money and modern science. It was in that darkest moment, when a father had lost all faith and the world outside was freezing over, the door swung open. It wasn't another doctor, not another invited specialist. It was a boy, thin, shivering from the cold, his shoulders dusted with snow. A homeless boy with nothing but a thin shirt and bare feet on the cold marble floor. His name was Leo. He looked right at the broken architect, ignoring the astonished stares of the nurses, and said a simple sentence, a sentence that should have been insane, but carried an inexplicable weight. He said, "I can bring her back." The story you are about to see wasn't just told. It was documented. It defied medical experts. It became a mystery that no security camera could capture, but was seared into the hearts of everyone who was there. This is the journey to find the answer to the question: how did a boy with nothing succeed where a fortune and the most advanced science had failed? Stay with me, because what happened next inside that ICU room will redefine everything you believe about human limits, the power of love, and the true nature of miracles. Our journey begins now. The air in the hospital lobby seemed to freeze solid, even thicker than the snow piling up outside the windows. The boy Leo's words, though just a whisper, echoed like thunder in Cole Faulkner's mind. I can bring her back. An impossible claim, a laughable arrogance. If it hadn't come from a child with eyes that were terrifyingly clear and calm. The nurses standing nearby exchanged weary glances. They were used to desperate relatives clinging to unrealistic beliefs. But this was different. This boy didn't seem frantic. He seemed certain. To understand the silence on the 57th floor, you have to understand the laughter that once filled it. Zoe Faulkner was not a quiet child. She was a small tornado of color and creativity. She drew on everything, from napkins to the walls of her playroom. Her laugh was a high, clear chime, and she had a habit of telling her father stories about the stars before she went to sleep. Cole, an architect of lines and logic, had always found his balance in his daughter's whimsical world. But then work pulled him away. Long business trips, sleepless nights over blueprints. He missed a few stories about the stars, then a few dinners, and then he missed the first warning signs. A fleeting headache. A moment she lost her balance and fell. He told himself it was just the normal exhaustion of an active child. And then that fateful day, no warning. She just collapsed in the middle of the living room. At the hospital, the cold medical terms were delivered like hammer blows. Brainstem stroke, irreversible damage. And finally, locked-in syndrome. A vibrant, intelligent, terrified mind held prisoner forever inside a non-responsive body. Cole had looked into his daughter's wide-open eyes, searching for a sign, for recognition, but all he got back was a blank stare. It was the ultimate torture, knowing his daughter was in there, listening to her own silence and being able to do nothing. And then hope arrived, but it took a different form, a form of 21st century hubris. Gideon Sterling and his Neuralink Corporation descended in a media storm. He didn't talk about healing, he talked about data. He didn't look at Zoe, he looked at the monitors. The hardware is intact, Gideon told Cole, his tone as casual as if discussing a computer. The operating system has just crashed. We're going to perform a hard reboot. They brought in a massive machine, bristling with wires and electrodes. Nurse Davies, a woman who had seen every shade of joy and grief in her 20 years in intensive care, just quietly shook her head. She had seen men like Sterling before, men who believed money and technology could solve death itself. She had seen families pin all their hopes on gleaming machines, only to be left with an even heavier silence. They fitted the electrode cap onto Zoe's head. A blue light scanned, numbers danced across a screen. Cole held his breath, his heart squeezed by an invisible hand. And then, nothing. The beep remained steady. Zoe's eyes remained vacant. The billion-dollar machine, Gideon Sterling's pride, was terrifyingly silent. Failure. Complete. Sterling left without an apology, leaving behind a pile of bills and a despair that had been pushed to its deepest depths. In that moment, Nurse Davies walked over and gently touched Cole's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, her voice full of genuine empathy. "Sometimes the best thing we can do is accept." And that's when Cole Faulkner heard Leo's voice. The boy stood there, an illogical presence in a space of logic and failure. For the first time in weeks, Cole looked at someone who wasn't talking to him about vitals or charts. The boy just looked at him, then toward Zoe, as if he could see the soul trapped inside. The architect's logic screamed in Cole's head that this was absurd, insane. But the father's heart, a heart that was shattered and had nothing left to lose, whispered a different question. Why not? He took a deep breath, the cold hospital air filling his lungs. He looked at Nurse Davies, who was watching him with a mix of pity and warning. But then he turned back to the boy. "What's your name?" Cole asked, his voice a raw rasp. "Leo," the boy answered. What do you want to do?" Leo took a step forward, his bare feet seeming not to feel the cold of the floor. He didn't look at the machines. He looked straight at Cole. "I just need to sit with her," the boy said. "And I need you to stay, because this isn't her fight alone." And Cole Faulkner, the man of blueprints and precise calculations, did the most illogical thing of his life. He nodded. He stepped aside, clearing a path for a homeless boy to walk into the heart of his tragedy, carrying a promise the rest of the world knew was impossible. The ICU door swung shut behind Leo, sealing the sterile space within from the skepticism of the world outside. Nurse Davies stood at her station, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the room's glass window. Another spectacle, she told herself. Poor father, he'll be even more broken when this is over. She'd seen enough faith healers, psychics, and miracle peddlers to know they only ever left behind a silence heavier than before. She gave them 15 minutes. Inside, the air was even quieter. Leo did nothing. He didn't chant. He didn't wave his hands. He just gently pulled over a stool and sat down beside Zoe's bed on the opposite side from Cole. He rested one hand on the bed rail, not touching her, and just watched. His calm was strange. It wasn't the silence of a shy child, but the stillness of an ancient mountain. Cole stood there, awkward and lost. He didn't know what to do, what to say. He was a man of plans, of purposeful action. This inaction made him uncomfortable. The minutes stretched on, feeling like an eternity, with only the steady rhythm of the machines to prove time was still moving. Then Leo turned, and for the first time, he looked directly into Cole's eyes. His gaze held no pity. It held a terrifying clarity. "She hears you," Leo said, his voice quiet but clear. "But she doesn't feel you. She's drifting, and your voice doesn't have enough weight to pull her back. She needs to know the real reason you're here." Cole frowned. "The real reason? I'm here for my daughter. I'm her father." "That's the truth from your head," Leo replied calmly. "But your heart is telling a different story. She needs to hear that one." The boy paused, then delivered a line that felt like a knife, that's piercing the defensive wall Cole had spent a lifetime building. Tell her you're scared, not that you'll lose her, but that you're scared of being alone with the silence. Blood rushed to Cole's face. A wave of anger and shame surged through him. Who was this child to judge him? To see the cowardly, selfish fear he had never admitted to anyone, not even himself. The architect's logic screamed in his head. Absurd. Throw him out. This is a cruel hoax. He clenched his hands into fists, his knuckles turning white. But as he opened his mouth to speak, he looked again at Leo's eyes. There was no judgment, only a patient waiting. And then he looked over at Zoe, at her still beautiful face, her wide, vacant eyes. He had tried everything: science, money, hope. They had all failed. What did he have left to lose? The defensive wall of Cole Faulkner, built of logic and pride over 40 years, began to crack. He stumbled forward and knelt beside Zoe's bed, facing Leo. He took his daughter's small, cold hand in his. "Zoe, honey," he began, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." He took a deep breath, and then, like a breaking dam, it all poured out. Not the hollow words of love, but the raw, ugly truth. "I'm so scared, Zoe," he whispered, tears beginning to trace paths down his cheeks. "I'm not scared you're going to leave me. I'm scared the silence will come back, like after your mom died. I filled the house with work, with trips, just so I wouldn't have to hear it. And you were the laughter, the only sound left that mattered. Now, you're quiet too. I'm scared of being alone in that empty house. I'm more scared of the quiet than I am of death. I'm so selfish. I'm sorry, honey. I'm so sorry." He buried his head in the blanket, his body shaking with silent sobs. His whole life, he had built walls to protect himself. Now, he had just torn them down with his own hands. In the room, there was only the sound of Cole's choked sobs. The machine still went beep, beep, beep. But then there was a change, a tiny sound, a sharper, quicker blip from the heart rate monitor. Nurse Davies, still watching from a distance, narrowed her eyes. It could have been a simple anomaly. She started to turn away. But then she saw it, something no machine could create, something no scientific explanation could account for at that moment. From the corner of Zoe Faulkner's wide, vacant eye, a single tear slowly rolled down, catching the light of the ICU, and disappeared into the white pillow. Just one tear. But in the absolute silence of that room, it landed like a tidal wave. The hands of Nurse Davies, the woman hardened by every tragedy, began to tremble. She stared at the tear, then up at the monitor, as if trying to find a logical reason for the impossible. That single tear was like a stone dropped onto a still lake, sending ripples out through the room. Cole Faulkner lifted his head, stunned. He stared at the wet track on his daughter's cheek. His heart, which had shriveled with grief, now gave a powerful thud of disbelief and hope. It was real. After weeks of emptiness, a response, a message from the other side of the silent wall, had been sent. Nurse Davies was no longer at a distance. As if pulled by an invisible force, she entered the room, her professional eyes scanning the monitors. Zoe's heart rate was slightly elevated, not alarming, but a distinct change. Her brainwave activity, once a nearly flat line, now showed tiny, fluttering peaks. Medically, they were still insignificant changes, but in this context, they were mountains. It's real," she whispered, not to Cole, but as if convincing herself. Cole turned to Leo, his eyes no longer filled with anger or shame, but with an awe that bordered on worship. How did you know?" Leo didn't answer the question. He just looked at Zoe, then back at Cole. "A tear is a hello," he said, his voice still calm. "But she needs a path to come back, a memory bright enough to light the way through the fog. Your apology opened the door. Now you have to show her what's on the other side." "What do you mean?" Cole asked, confused. "A path? A memory?" "Tell her the story," Leo said. "Not a fairy tale from a book. Your story, the one you stopped telling a long time ago." He tilted his head. "The story of the lighthouse on Lake Michigan." Cole felt as if he'd been struck. The lighthouse. It wasn't a real story. It was an imaginary world he and Zoe had created together on rainy Sunday evenings years ago when his wife was still alive. A world of lost ships, a brave lighthouse keeper, and a light that never went out. He had buried that story with his grief, deeming it too childish, too naive for a harsh reality. How could this child know? He stammered, how do you know about that?" "She remembers," Leo said simply. "And so do you. Find it." Cole closed his eyes. He tried to dig deep into his own mind, past the layers of exhaustion and sorrow. At first, it was all a jumble, but then, like a faint spark, an image appeared. Zoe, age 5, sitting on his lap, pointing out the window and asking why the light on top of the John Hancock building never turned off. And he had made up the first story. While Cole struggled with his memory, Leo quietly reached into the pocket of his frayed jacket. He pulled out a small gray pebble, worn smooth by the waters of Lake Michigan. He carefully uncurled Zoe's limp fingers and gently placed the cool stone in her palm. "This is a piece of the land," Leo whispered, just loud enough for Cole and Nurse Davies to hear, "so she knows the shore is always waiting." That act was like a key, unlocking the flood of memories in Cole. He took a breath, opened his eyes, and began to speak. His voice was hesitant and shaky at first. "Once upon a time," he began, "on a small island in the middle of the Great Lake, Michigan, there was a lighthouse taller than all the skyscrapers. And the keeper wasn't an old man with a long beard, but a brave little girl with hair as black as the night sky." He told the story. He told of fog so thick that ships lost their way. He told of the little keeper who never slept, always keeping her crystal lamp shining, casting rainbows of light through the mist. His voice grew stronger, more confident. He was no longer a grieving architect. He was a father again, a storyteller, weaving a world for his daughter. Nurse Davies stood pressed against the wall, completely captivated, forgetting to chart, forgetting procedure. Cole reached the climax. And then, the biggest ship, the one that had been lost the longest, was about to crash on the rocks. But the little keeper gave it everything she had. She turned the crystal lamp toward the ship and sent out the strongest beam of light, a beam of hope that cut through the thickest fog. As he finished the sentence, a second miracle happened. Zoe Faulkner's fingers, which had been motionless for weeks, slowly curled inward. They tightened around the gray pebble in her palm. It wasn't a reflex, not a spasm. It was a purposeful movement, a grasp. Nurse Davies let out a small, sharp cry, a sound caught between astonishment and disbelief. Cole stopped talking, staring at his daughter's hand clutching the stone. Tears streamed down his face again, but this time they weren't tears of pain, but of a joy so intense, so pure, it was almost unbearable. Leo stood up as quietly as he had arrived. He looked at Cole, then at Zoe's tightened fist, and gave a small nod. "Keep telling the stories," the boy said. "She's listening." And with that, he turned, walked out of the room, and vanished into the quiet hallway, leaving behind a father who had found his story again, a nurse who had witnessed the impossible, and a small gray stone growing warm in the palm of a little girl who was on her way home. Leo was gone, but the energy he'd left behind seemed to linger in the air. It transformed the cold hospital room into a sanctuary, a place where the normal rules of medicine seemed to be temporarily suspended. Nurse Davies didn't return to her station. She quietly pulled the door almost shut, creating a private space, a protective bubble for the unfolding miracle. She became a silent guardian, protecting this moment from the disruptions of the outside world. Cole didn't notice. His entire world had now shrunk to the sound of his own voice, his daughter's face, and the gray pebble held in Zoe's small hand. He kept talking. After the story of the lighthouse ended, he told her about their trips to the aquarium, about how Zoe had laughed uncontrollably when a sea lion waved at her. He told her about the first time he taught her to ride a bike, about the scraped knees and the pride in her eyes when she pedaled her first few feet on her own. Hour after hour, Cole stayed there. His voice grew hoarse, his body ached, but he didn't dare stop. Each story, each memory felt like a rope he was throwing into the darkness to pull his daughter back. He could feel a faint warmth radiating from her hand as it held the stone, and it was all the fuel he needed. He realized a painful truth. For years, he had been so busy building structures for the world that he had forgotten to build a world of memories for his own daughter. Now, he was trying to rebuild it all, brick by brick, with his own voice. The afternoon began to fade, the weak light of a Chicago winter filtering through the blinds. Cole was exhausted. His voice was a raw whisper. He leaned down, resting his cheek against Zoe's hand, the one holding the stone. "Do you remember, Zoe?" He whispered, no longer telling a story, just a father's confession. "Do you remember the lighthouse beam? It's still there for you. I'm still here. Just find your way home. Just a little light, honey." And then, in the exhaustion and the quiet it came, a sound, faint, as fleeting as a breath. Light. Cole froze. His entire body seemed to shut down. Had he imagined it? Had his exhausted mind simply produced the sound it most desperately wanted to hear? He slowly raised his head, his heart hammering in his chest. "Zoe?" he called softly, his voice trembling. "Honey, did you just say something? Can you say it again for Daddy?" He held his breath, waiting. The room fell into an absolute crushing silence. And then, a little clearer, Zoe's dry lips parted. "Dad?" Time stopped. That one word, that whisper of Dad, had the force of an explosion. It shattered every wall of despair, of grief, of helplessness that had imprisoned Cole for weeks. He broke down, but this time he was crying with relief, with an irrepressible bursting joy. Nurse Davies, in the corner of the room, covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her face as well. She fumbled to press the doctor's call button, her voice breaking into the phone. "Doctor, room 57? Patient Faulkner. She spoke. My God, she spoke." In his overwhelming elation, a thought struck Cole. The boy. Leo, he had to thank him. He had to let him know the miracle had truly happened. He rushed out of the room, his heart still racing. "Nurse Davies, where's the boy from before? Leo?" Nurse Davies snapped back to reality. "I didn't see him leave. Let me check the security cameras." They ran to the security office together. The old guard, after hearing the unbelievable story, agreed to rewind all the footage from the past few hours. They stared intently at the screens. They saw Cole enter. They saw Gideon Sterling's team. They saw Nurse Davies. They saw Cole break down and cry. But for that entire period, the automatic doors to the main lobby, where Leo would have had to enter from the storm, registered no boy matching his description. The hallway leading to Zoe's room was completely empty at the exact time both Cole and Nurse Davies were certain they had seen Leo walk through it. The boy had never existed on any frame of the footage. Cole returned to the room, filled with a profound sense of wonder and awe. Zoe was more alert now. He sat down and took her hand, which was now warm. "Zoe?" he asked softly. "Do you remember anything? About a boy?" Zoe's deep eyes looked at him. She gave a weak nod. "I was lost," she whispered, her voice still thin. "In the dark, it was cold. But then there was a voice, a boy's voice. He said he was the lighthouse keeper. He told me not to be scared, and he gave me a stone so I'd know the way back. He just kept singing and singing until I heard your voice, Dad." Cole squeezed his daughter's hand, feeling the pebble still resting in her palm. He understood. Leo wasn't a healer. He was a lighthouse, and he had come, shining his light through the fiercest storm, to guide a small, lost soul back home. A year after that fateful day in the blizzard, on a quiet Chicago street, stood a building unlike any other. It wasn't a cold office or a sterile hospital. It was built of warm brick, with large windows that let the sunlight pour in. It was called the Lighthouse Project. And its founder was none other than Cole Faulkner. Cole had sold his architectural firm. He had left the world of blueprints and multi-million-dollar contracts behind. He realized that the greatest legacy a man could build wasn't a skyscraper, but a safe harbor for souls in a storm. The place offered free art and storytelling therapy for families facing illness and loss. Inside, the air smelled of oil paint, clay, and hope. In one corner, a little girl with jet black hair was intently painting. Her picture was of a towering lighthouse in a dark sea, casting a brilliant beam of light. It was Zoe. She didn't just walk, she ran. She didn't just talk, she sang. The scar of her trauma was still there, but it was no longer a prison. It was a reminder of the power of light. The gray pebble from that day now sat in a place of honor, inside a glass box on her father's desk, like a sacred relic. Nurse Davies was a regular visitor on her days off. She was no longer a skeptical nurse. She was a volunteer who read stories to the children. Whenever someone asked her about the miracle of that day, she would just smile and say, "I've stopped trying to explain it. I'm just grateful I got to witness it." The story of Zoe's recovery became a hospital legend, one told by veteran nurses to the new recruits on long night shifts. And the story of Leo, the boy who never existed on camera, became a quiet symbol of faith in the impossible. One Saturday afternoon, as Cole was helping another little boy sculpt a dinosaur from clay, the center's door opened. A young couple walked in, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. Trailing behind them was a boy of about 7 with vacant eyes. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 months, not since a car accident had taken his older sister. Cole felt a heart-wrenching familiarity. He saw himself from a year ago in the other father's eyes. He walked over gently. "Hello," he said, his voice warm. "I'm Cole. Welcome to the lighthouse. We don't have doctors here, just stories and a lot of paint." He sat down next to the silent boy, not trying to force a conversation. Instead, he took a smooth pebble from his pocket, identical to Zoe's, and placed it in the boy's hand. "A friend once told me," Cole said softly, "that this is a piece of the land, so you know the shore is always waiting." The boy stared at the stone, his lips parted. His parents held their breath. And then he looked up at Cole, his eyes no longer empty but filled with a strange recognition. He whispered, his first words in months, "You know him too?" A current ran down Cole's spine. "Him? Who are you talking about?" The boy clutched the stone, the boy with the old coat. "He came to me in my dreams. He said my sister made it to the lighthouse, that she's safe. He told me not to be afraid of the dark anymore, because my mom and dad were waiting on the other side of the light." Cole was utterly stunned. He looked over his shoulder, where Zoe was teaching another little girl how to mix the perfect shade of sea green. She felt her father's gaze, looked up, and gave him a brilliant smile. In that instant, Cole Faulkner understood a truth even greater than the miracle that had saved his daughter. Leo wasn't a one-time event. He was an echo, a ripple of kindness and hope, passed from one person to the next. The miracle wasn't healing Zoe. The real miracle was that Cole, Zoe, and now this little boy had all become small lighthouses, continuing the mysterious keeper's work, shining their own lights for the next lost ship to see. And that was the final, most important lesson. Miracles aren't something to be witnessed. They are a gift to be passed on.